Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 9 of the HCDE Research Speakers Series. So thank you all for coming. I know it's that time of the quarter when things get busy, so I appreciate everyone coming here and then everyone who will be watching this later online. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Cecilia Aragon. So Cecilia joined HCDE in 2010. I just confirmed that with her. She had a really wonderful career before that at Lawrence Berkeley Lab and has won all sorts of accolades. She won a PCASE award, which is like awarded by the Presidential Early Career Award based on that. And she's a member of the distinguished member of the Association for Computing Machinery, and she's one of the foremost researchers in the field of human-centered data science and has written a book on it. Also, a fun fact, if you didn't know this about Cecilia, she's also a champion acrobatic pilot, and she published a memoir on her experience of learning to fly. I don't know if any of this will be in her talk, but if not, you can ask her about it later. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Cecilia.
Thanks, Julie, for the introduction. Yeah, I didn't put no video of me flying upside down in this talk because it's short, but I am going to talk a little bit about flying and why. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what is human-centered data science, which is something people often ask me, and why does it matter? And I admit that I actually changed the talk a little bit because I want to talk about some personal aspects of my work as well as the technical aspects. So I've been working in computer science and artificial intelligence for about 30 years. I did a lot of work in combinatorial optimization, statistical algorithms, machine learning, et cetera, and so I've seen several waves of artificial intelligence come and go. And certainly the new algorithms for artificial intelligence now are very, very interesting and very powerful, but I think that maybe the general public doesn't quite understand what is going on with the current artificial intelligence wave and the large language models, and they don't really have the right mental model of what is going on there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. But I also want to make this talk be a bit about encouraging those of you in engineering to stay in the field, because human-centered engineering is really, 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 really important, especially now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why. So I'm going to start by asking you some questions about odds, all right? So there are about 26,000 engineering professors at universities in the United States. Okay, so I'm the daughter of adult immigrants to the US. I'm Latina. So how many of these engineering professors do you think are Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, however you want to call it? Any ideas? How many out of 26,000? Just wild guesses. 2,600. 200. Hispanic, Latinx. Or what's the number? 200. 200, okay. That's a good guess. That's a nice low number. Less than 1%. You know that Latinos we're about 30 to 40% of the population of the US. So if it was that low, it would be kind of devastatingly low. So I'd like to say the good news is it's not quite that low. Any other guesses? So this is, what? 20%. Okay, that's more like what it should be, right? 20% would be about 5,000. It's a lot less than that. It's a lot closer to 200. There's actually 600, okay? About 600 of them, all right? Which is really about 2%. Really pretty low, all right? And now, okay, so the next really interesting question is how many of those were born in the US? Okay, so my parents were both adult immigrants, so they both spoke with very thick accents, and I saw firsthand the kind of discrimination that they experienced here in this country. And so I thought, when I first heard this, is how many of these are born in the US and how many came from outside the country? And I thought, well, I'm guessing that the vast majority of these must be born in the US, because it's so much harder. When you come in from outside the country, you have a language barrier, you have the cultural barriers, you don't know the unwritten rules, right? My parents didn't know it. When they sent me to college, they didn't know any of the rules. They didn't know. I didn't find out about the PSAT and the PSAT until a week before the test. All right. My guidance counselor didn't think I was going to go to college because I'm Hispanic. Nobody else does, right? So okay. So how many of these 600 do you think were born in the U.S. and how many were adult immigrants? Any guesses? Yes. 200 are born in the U.S. Okay, that's a good guess. About a third are born in the U.S. and 2/3 come from outside. So that would go against my belief, which was that it was easier for people who were born in the U.S. to get these positions, right? So you are saying that despite it being easier for US-born people, there's still only a third. Anybody else have any thoughts? Any guesses? 90% are born in the US? Okay, that's kind of what I thought when I first started looking into this, right? The 90% will be born in the US, but it turns out it's the other way around. Okay, only 48 of those. This was back in, what year was this? 2018. It's better now. It's a little better now, not much. So few of them were born. Y is less than 10%. And that just was shocking to me until I started thinking about my own experience as a child. So my parents both experienced, a lot of racism, right? So my dad would just sort of shrug it off, right? He would come in, he would say, oh yeah, this person is racist, and he didn't care, because he knew inside, he knew about his own abilities. He never doubted his own abilities. My mom and I we would go into a store, and they would refuse to serve us, and one time, my parents put in an offer on a house in a good neighborhood in the small town in Indiana where we lived, and they took it off the market, And you'd think that, but my dad just thought it was kind of a joke, because he said, oh yeah, it's fine. And sure enough, nobody else bought the house, and then they had to put it back on the market, and he made a lower offer. So he thought it was funny. He said, oh, this is, I got it for less money because they were racist. So that was his attitude. Whereas for me, okay, I kind of internalized everything that my teachers said to me. Like every year when I was growing up, I was put in the slow reading group in my school, every single year. And every time I did well on a math test, the first test, the teacher would give me the look, as though they couldn't believe that someone like me could do that well. And I even had a teacher in 5th grade. So I'd written this essay that I was really proud of. And this teacher, my 5th grade teacher, called me up after I turned it in. And I thought, oh, she's going to say what a great essay this is. And I was like excited. In 5th grade, little me came up. And then she says, Cecilia, do you know what plagiarism is? And I was like, well, of course I do, but what are you saying? And she said, well, I know that someone like you couldn't possibly know all that advanced vocabulary. So where did you get this paper from? I said, I wrote it. And she was like, mm-hmm. And the fact is that when you get this kind of pervasive, low expectations being put upon you throughout childhood, it has a greater impact than if you come to this country as an adult and experienced racism as an adult. The problem was that I thought when I didn't get opportunities because I was a Latina or because I was a woman, I thought there was something wrong with me. There was something wrong with my personality. And so I grew up believing that there was something deficient about me the whole time. And of course, you see there's fewer who are US-born Latinas, all right? And it ended up that I was actually the first Latina to be named to be a full professor in the College of Engineering here at the University of Washington in its 100-year history. But the good news is after I did it, 2 more Latinas were promoted to full professor. So all it takes is, I guess what I'm trying to tell you all is that there are dark times ahead, and you have to remember that even though there are dark times, you can still make it through. You just have to keep going. Reach out to your friends, your classmates. Support each other, because that is how I made it through. Is I had support from many people. I had support from my family, and that is what gave me the courage to keep going. And I think we're going to start seeing this again, because when I was a kid, I kept thinking, oh yeah, things will get better, things will get better. And, it's not always going to get better. So just remember that if you don't ever feel, so who here has ever heard of imposter syndrome? Raise your hand if you have. Okay. Who has ever felt it yourself? Yes, right? So if you've ever felt that, don't believe it, okay? Because the likelihood of you having imposter syndrome is most likely from these childhood experiences. And it doesn't have to be because of race or gender. It can just be the way you grew up as a child, that you were discouraged by the people around you. Maybe, you had parents who weren't supportive, or maybe you were not neurotypical, and you were told you weren't any good. So do not believe any of that. I know it's hard sometimes, but just by being here, you are all brilliant. You are wonderful. Just think of what you've done to get to this university, to get into this major, and to do this work. You are amazing, and never forget that, okay? Because I needed people to tell me that when I was a kid, and when I got older, more people did. And so that's why I became a teacher, actually, is because I wanted to tell students who were feeling discouraged that you can do it. All right, now I'm gonna get into the science. Okay, so despite that, inauspicious beginning where I was really afraid of everything. I was afraid of heights. I was afraid of talking to people. I didn't open my mouth in school, but I still managed to go ahead and to have a really great career in data, first in computer science and AI, and then moving into human-centered data science. And so the reason why I think I stuck it out is that you see this gap here from 1988 to 1995 when I was an air show and test pilot. I learned how to fly airplanes upside down. You see, I had dropped out of my PhD program because I was scared. I thought I was not good enough to get a PhD. And it was only after I started flying loops and rolls and spins and going upside down that I realized that irrationally, deep inside me, I was more scared of succeeding by getting a PhD than I was of facing death in an airplane. I mean, just think about that. Could a PhD be scarier than facing death in a plane? Well, to do that, you have to go back to my childhood again. So I would do very well in school. I would get 100% in math. And my classmates didn't like that. I had a number of classmates and hit me, all right, the white boys in the class. And at one point, a group of 3 boys hit me with a metal stick, a metal pole, until they hit me so hard I became unconscious. And so to some extent, and they said that I should stop doing so well on my math tests. So yeah, so you can sort of see, well, maybe irrationally, I thought that succeeding, getting high scores in math, was the sort of thing that might lead to death. Okay? I mean, it's totally not rational, but when you're a young kid, you get all this fed into you. Okay? So what I had to do is fight it the only way I knew how, and that was by fighting my fears. And so I started taking flying lessons, so I was a terrible pilot, and I faced my fears, and it took a while, but eventually I got to the point where I was no longer afraid when I was flying, and I actually won a spot on the United States aerobatic team, the Olympics of aviation, and won medals at the World Championships. And I still remember my proudest moment probably was when my parents were standing on the ground. I was on the podium. They were playing the national anthem, and I saw tears in their eyes. That's their adopted daughter. Their daughter was representing their adopted country in this World Championships. So what that taught me is if I fight and if I overcome my fears and if I don't let people tell me that I'm just a piece of dirt, which is what they tried to do, that I could succeed. And this is what I try to tell other people too, because we have to get a larger number of US-born and foreign-born people, into this country to do this really important work. We can't just let it be controlled by a small group of people, which is what they're trying to do now. They're trying to push everybody out who doesn't look like, the people in power in this country. So I hope that you will fight that. Okay, now, after spending a bunch of time on my personal story, I'll now go to the question about what is data science and what is human-centered data science, and how was I able to really kind of develop a new field. Because when I started out, nobody liked the idea of human-centered anything in computer science or data science. They thought it was weak and easy, and I was going into it because I was a girl, and that was not true. It's actually, the more I studied it, the more I realized the human-centered piece of technology is actually the most difficult and the most important. And that is what I was able to convince all these people of. I actually generated large funding streams because of this, all because I didn't give up. And because I used the courage that I gained from flying upside down to saying that I would turn this field upside down as well. So to talk about artificial intelligence now, which is on everyone's mind, and data science. So first of all, what's the relationship between the two? Does anybody have any thoughts? What's the relationship between artificial intelligence as it's being used today and data science? Yes? All right. You raised your hand first? Okay, what?
Yeah, I guess AI is a superset of data science. Data science is a part of.
You think AI is a superset of data science? Okay, why?
AI has a lot of data being crashed down into a model, and there's also a lot of other things in AI. I guess algorithms which are usually not in part of data science. We didn't correct data in data science, but
Okay.
Didn't think it through, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if I would agree with you, but that's a good argument. Did you have a different view, or it was the same? Okay. Well, my view is very different, all right? I think AI is a subset of data science. And the reason is the artificial intelligence we're using now, it all relies on very large data sets. It didn't used to be that way back in the day when they were doing declarative models and writing programs in Lisp. But now all of the AI, the large language models, everything we're seeing now is based on statistical algorithms that are run over very, very large data sets. So, and I would go so far as to say the current wave of excitement in AI is exclusively due to the availability of very large data sets. So it's really a subset of data science, the way it is today. That could change, but right now, I don't think any of we wouldn't, large language models, right? Large amounts of data. And algorithms are also part of data science, because data science is really the study of how you manipulate data, but it's not just collecting data in the database. It's how do you analyze it? How do you scrape it? How do you collect it? How do you extract information from it? So algorithms are just as much a part of data science as they are of AI, even more so, right? Because there are some algorithms that are in data science but are not in AI. And all of these are statistical models. These all come from data science and statistics. Okay, so now let's take a step back and talk about what are people's mental models of artificial intelligence right now. And this was, I don't know if anybody has read this old science fiction series from the 1950s and 60s, the Danny Dunn series. Did anybody read this? I mean, I'm showing my age, I think. I wasn't alive in 1958, but I was kind of a geek when I was a little kid. I loved science fiction. And so I would go to the library and read all the books that were there. And this was a range of books from 1956 to 1974. So this was, toward the end, that was the time I was growing up. And what's kind of cool is this book, Danny Dunn and the Homework Machine, really, I think, talks about the mental model that people had then about what computers and artificial intelligence were really like. And it's interesting because science fiction is just great, because when you read science fiction, it tells you a lot about the time at which it was written, right? Because there's so many unwritten assumptions that are present in the science fiction that you wouldn't see any other time, right? When you read a realistic novel, they really talk about what happened then, and it's very focused on that. It's very conscious. But everything here was kind of subconscious. So like the computer that they built, well, you would talk to it, okay, and it would recognize your speech, but then it couldn't generate speech. It had to print out the answers, which is the exact opposite of how it was in real life when we started generating speech and recognizing speech. It turns out recognizing speech is a much, much harder problem than just synthesizing speech. So, scan card for access, enter password. System is locked, okay. But, did it come back? Oh, okay, awesome, thank you. I'm glad you're here. I would not have known what to do. Anyway, the point is that people's mental models are often extremely wrong. So there's so many people now who've been saying things like, oh, large language models, ChatGPT, it's very close to, AGI, right? It's automated general intelligence. It's thinking. And the reason it is it's not, all right? It is not. I know the algorithms, and they are just statistical algorithms that are really kind of pattern matching, and it's a probabilistic prediction of what the next word will be next. But people don't know that, and we as humans tend to anthropomorphize everything. Did anybody ever hear about the Roomba vacuum cleaners they were little robotic vacuum cleaners that would wander around your house and vacuum it. And everybody they gave them names, because we are kind of hardwired to think, to imagine that there is a sentient being inside on any kind of autonomous activity. All right, so that's our belief here. Laptop signal detected. I'm going to say yes. Okay, all right. Okay. So there's been a lot of work done on the definition of what is human-centered AI, what makes human-centered AI possible, and just huge numbers of papers. This was a paper that studied 257 papers written before July 2022. So you can imagine how many thousands there are today. And so, of course, since we're doing human-centered design and engineering, we're interested in human-centered AI. And there are many people in this department, as well as across the University of Washington, who are also thinking about human-centered AI. So when Capel and Brereton analyzed these papers a few years ago, they came up with 4 areas. And I think these 4 areas are still pretty much true. There's explainable or interpretable AI, human-centered approaches to design and evaluate it, humans collaborating with AI, and ethical AI. And these are all 4 very important areas. This is a great paper. They put it all, they defined it. Ben Schneiderman also wrote a great book on human-centered AI, where he came up with a framework where he says, let's think of AI as a super tool. And these are all great ways to think about it. But what I think is more important than defining it is saying, well, what will we do? How will we take a design-centered approach to this definition? Will we take an engineering systems approach to this definition? And what are the best practices? I mean, artificial intelligence is here, and there's so many concerns with it. So there are a lot of potential benefits, and there are a lot of potential harms. I mean, the amount of power these systems use, right? I just heard someone say, every time you make a query to ChatGPT, it's like, turning on the light in your house for an hour, So we still don't understand what's going on, and I think it is much more important to be focusing on the human-centered piece, the societal impacts of artificial intelligence, than to be arguing about whether it's, whether the singularity is going to come, whether there's going to be, whether these machines are going to be intelligent, because they're not going to be, not anytime soon. And I can say that as a practitioner. But what I think is something that we should be spending our time on is deciding how can we look at this new field, or this reborn field, and how can we make sure that we keep it human-centered? So I'm going to talk about 3 main reasons why human-centered data science and human-centered AI are pretty important. First of all, one is that thinking about the human issues in data science is necessary, and I'm assuming that everybody here in HCDE cares about the human-centered piece. But I give a lot of talks to people who are all technologists, and so these are great arguments. So if you run into a technologist who thinks, oh, AI is everything, you can use these 3 arguments to tell them why human-centered AI or human-centered data science is the way to go, and why we have to think about these human issues. First, thinking about the issues is necessary. Second, and this is something that surprises a lot of the people in the field. Human-centered approaches to data science and AI actually make the technical work stronger. I mean, you probably all know this, but they did not know. I worked in this area for a long time when I was the only one doing it in my lab, and I was able to convince them, enough so that they built a $100 million funding stream just because of the evidence that I showed them. So you can, and I got the courage to do that because of my flying upside down, all right? Because everybody told me I was wrong, but I said, no, this is really important, and here is the evidence why. And they believed me. And then finally, data science and AI is human-centered, whether we believe it or not. So, okay, so why is it necessary? All right, so I'm sure everybody who's used automated systems has an intuitive grasp that there are gaps in these systems. All right, this is a paper we wrote that we called folk labeling, because you'll notice that all these automated lights, automated, these sinks that have, that are automated detection of your hands, all of these things have gaps, and often people don't get them right, and so you have to put in these little handwritten folk labels to explain the gaps between the technology and what humans expect. It's actually, a big deal, and of course, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of interesting stuff, right? Like people posted signs saying, wash your hands for at least 20 seconds. And then there was another sign that said, don't waste water. Wash your hands in less than 10 seconds. So, the fact is the humans are adaptable and can adapt to the current conditions, whereas no AI would have predicted the pandemic. All right, so it takes human thinking. But beyond these sort of everyday, mundane tasks, there are much more serious impacts. And I'm only going to talk about one of these pieces of work. There are many people who've worked in this field about how artificial intelligence actually supercharges inequality. And Virginia Eubanks, in her book, Automating Inequality, which is one of many excellent books in the field, talked about an attempt by the state of Indiana to streamline and privatize government benefits in their welfare program. The problem was that the automated system had no human discretion. And so this automated system was a disaster. Thousands of people who deserved benefits lost benefits. This was billed, as a system that was going to reduce fraud, take all these small pieces and systematize them in one overarching, finance transformation for the whole state. But it was such a disaster because people lost benefits and they couldn't reach a human to call them. A 6-year-old girl with cerebral palsy died because she couldn't get access to her medication and the parents couldn't reach a human. She'd gotten this automated failure to cooperate notice, and nothing could be done. So although it was billed as a way of saving money for the government, making government smaller, guess what? It actually was much more expensive. There were so many lawsuits. It was just a complete disaster. So if they really had thought some more about how to make this system human-centered, it might have achieved, maybe, some or all of the goals they had. But as it was, it did not work. Now, this is an older Stack Overflow developer survey, a survey of programmers. And this was about 6 years ago, but from what I've heard, it's still valid today. So if you look at the people who are actually building these AI systems, all right, if you talk to them and say, do you developers have an obligation to consider the ethical obligations of what you write? And the vast majority, 80% say, oh yeah, of course, we do have this obligation. But then, what would you do if you were asked to write code for an unethical purpose? And now, all of a sudden, only 60% said no. And then if you say, well, who's most responsible for code that is unethical? And now it was like, well, 60% now said, well, it's upper management. It's my boss. It's not me, the person who came up with the idea. And only about 20% said it was the person who wrote it. And that's kind of devastating. And this is why I'm a teacher at a university, because I hope that all of you who go out there and work in this field will say, yes, I am responsible, and I am not going to let unethical code get out of my department. If you're working on the human-centered piece, that you will stand up and say something about it. If you're writing software, that you will refuse to do it. That's really, where the rubber meets the road, is where these algorithms are being written.